Hey, how you doing? This is RJ. So today, I'm going to look at the question whether or not the events of the past week, Donald Trump getting reelected to the office of president, is going to affect our entertainment or not. And the more basic question being whether or not the events of the past week are going to lead to good entertainment. And I want to do this right now because emotions are high pretty much across the board. But this is exactly the time where we need to look in a disimpassioned, rational way at the answer to that question and why exactly we get such an answer. And I'm not going to bury the lead. The answer is no. We're not going to get better entertainment out of this, certainly in the short term. In the short term, we're going to see quite the opposite. Your mainstream entertainment systems are going to go full bore in the wrong direction. However, there is now not just a ray of hope, but an actual path set before us so that in the long term, we can get, or at the very least, can move towards better entertainment. And furthermore, I like to do these kinds of videos because, as I said, I'm going to look at this in a disimpassioned and analytical way. And part of the usefulness of doing that is the fact that I'm a writer. And so I get to look at the basic psychology of a villain. And by contrast, of course, the hero. And it helps me write better heroes and write better villains. And speaking of that, there are 2 links in the description for my 3 graphic novels, 2 superhero graphic novels and 1 low fantasy graphic novel. You're looking at some of the beautiful art from those graphic novels in the background, and we concentrate on systems of merit, not only for the art, but for good storytelling as well. The central point of my stories is the exploration of a traditional hero. So if any of that sounds or looks appealing to you at all, click on one of those links in the description or the pinned comment and go on over and see if one of my graphic novels is for you. And besides that, just a quick note that we are now ramping up for the campaign for Thomas Valiant #2, which is the main book, my first book that I put out. And also very quickly, I want to mention that, yes, someone asked in the comments last week, do I promote other people's indie work? And yes, I do. On my live streams every Wednesday or every second Wednesday on my channel, I alternate with John's Longbox. We look for good, merit-based indie comics and sometimes other entertainment to promote. So if you're looking for alternate entertainment or you're an alternate entertainment creator, subscribe to me here and follow me on Twitter. You can DM me if you have some kind of merit-based entertainment that you want to promote. And there's a chance, I'll say chance, that you can come on the live stream and we'll help, as I'm discussing here, create better entertainment. But anyways, back to the topic. Now, I want to start in usually where I do a seemingly bizarre place, which is you can't help but escape, if you're on YouTube anyways, these compilations since the election of people simply freaking out about the result. But I watched one in particular that was extremely telling to me. And that one was a woman in a seemingly calm and collected way saying, for all of you people who voted for Trump, if you think he cares about you, you are completely wrong. And come Inauguration Day, you're going to find out just exactly that he does not care for you at all. And to me, that showed the absolute disconnect of these quote-unquote progressive people. Why? Because she absolutely does not understand that in a conservative mindset, you do not want your leader to care for you. We want our leaders to act in a disimpassioned way, in a rational and therefore economical and efficient way to do his job correctly. And I use the word economical very specifically. Why? Because this election was about economics. It's the economy, stupid. And this is the person who will reset a good times economy. And these people just can't get it through their heads. Why? Because they concentrate so much on emotion that they're even projecting onto their opponents something which is completely not there. By the way, not to mention the fact that the whole point of a political leader is to deal with politics. The foundation of dealing with politics correctly is justice. Justice is supposed to be blind. Justice is supposed to be disimpassioned. That's the whole point of justice, rendering to another person what is their due. Feelings don't enter into the entire thing. But again, these people, these quote-unquote progressive people, are so swamped with nothing but emotion that they can't think outside of the emotional box. And that is the exact reason why we're going to see what we're going to see over the next, well, minimum 4 years. And that's the reason why we get the answer to the question I posed at the first. Are we going to get better entertainment? No, we're not. Why? Because you might be thinking to yourself, well, they've just been shown, these quote unquote progressive people have just been shown that they are in the minority. Donald Trump has won not just the election, but the popular vote as well. It is clear and evident for everyone to see that these quote unquote progressive ideas are in the minority. And so you may be asking yourself the question, well, are the people who create entertainment, large or small, going to look at this and say, hey, maybe I need to turn around? If the majority of people who are going to buy my stuff don't like this way of describing the world, maybe I should describe it in a different way, in a better way. But no, that is absolutely not going to happen. And it's because the people who thoroughly believe in quote unquote progressivism have zero self-reflection. And the only way the scenario that I just presented is going to happen is if these people self-reflect, which they're not going to do. And again, here is the point which we need to concentrate on and explore. Why don't they have self-reflection? Not only does that help me write a better villain, but it also helps with the understanding of what we're going to do moving forward, where this path is to get to eventually better entertainment. And for a second, I should back up and say, it's not only that they don't have self-reflection, but it's they don't have even the basic building blocks of getting to self-reflection. And why? Because the entire quote-unquote progressive movement is based upon a victim narrative. And as a brief aside, I should note, if you look at the quote-unquote progressive people from, let's say, the 60s up until the 90s, you can see that they did have some bit of self-reflection. Why? Because they were brought up in a world where self-reflection was hammered into their head. It was a system of merit. But for the people from the 2000s until this point, no, they were brought up in a complete mindset of victimhood. Whereas those older progressives had to reject the system of merit and embrace victimhood to some extent. So it wasn't a full capture. These people in the last 20, 30 years, give or take, they are fully captured by the complete idea of victimhood. I've done videos on this ideological capture, talking about and going over studies themselves about, I think the video was about the Justice Department, talking about how they needed to revamp everything according to a victimhood narrative. So yes, this victimhood narrative has ideological capture of most of our institutions right now. And so has ideological capture of a vast number of people working in the entertainment systems, because that's what they're brought up under. And the thing about a victimhood narrative is that it destroys any idea of self-reflection. Why? Because the point of the victimhood narrative is to say, no, I'm not at fault for any of the bad things that happened to me. Some other people have imposed a situation upon me, making me a victim. Therefore, if you can point your finger at someone else as the problem constantly, there is absolutely no need for self-reflection. So much so that, again, being brought up in this system, they lack even the basic building blocks to even get to self-reflection. Now let's explore that for just a moment. This is in part why I talk about the difference between a shame culture and a guilt culture. And I've done numerous videos about that topic, saying that these quote-unquote progressive people want to institute what is basically a pagan shame culture. Why? Because Christianity is a guilt culture, and the last time we saw a shame culture in the West was in ancient times. And yes, I know, there are still elements of shame in a guilt culture and guilt in a shame culture, but the point is they want to bring us back to a majority shame culture. And that fits in exactly with what I've just been saying. Because a guilt culture is one where you take objective rules, you internalize those rules, and when you do something wrong, you point your finger at yourself and say, I must self-correct, I know I've done something wrong. Which takes what? It takes self-reflection. But a shame culture is where you don't do something wrong unless someone catches you and points the finger at you and says, you did something wrong, society must now shame you. That is the system of recorrection within a shame culture. And again, these people want to reinstitute a shame culture because they don't have the basic mechanisms necessary to feel guilt. Or I guess I should say more precisely, to process guilt. Secondly, and more notably towards all the things that I want to explain, this gives you the key to understanding exactly how these people have acted in the past and why they're going to continue to act that way in the future. It's because if you look psychologically at such people who don't have even the building blocks of self-reflection, you can see that the only thing they have available to them is emotion. Rationality, and certainly logic, require self-reflection. These are the basic building blocks of true logic. You go through the steps of simple apprehension, judgment, reason, logic. That second step, judgment, requires you to, in a disimpassioned way, look at what is true, compare it with what you are stating, and see whether or not it is correct, whether or not the basis of your argument has merit. And these people simply do not have the ability to get there. They don't even have the ability to get to simple apprehension, which is to say, to define a thing as it is, which is the first step. But again, to go back to the psychological study of such kinds of people, if you look at these people and see how they process things when they have no ability to self-reflect, they process everything through emotion, and, funny enough, when they get in a sticky spot wherein a normal person would self-reflect and say, I have to self-correct, what do? Well, they do the exact same thing that shame cultures used to do. They scapegoat. They place all of their faults on someone else and then try to drive that other person away. That's what scapegoating was. People would lay their hands on an animal to transfer their sin to that animal and then drive that animal out into the wilderness. That's what scapegoating is. That's what these people do. And they do it with pure emotion. Which means what? Which means that these people are simply going to lash out emotionally, saying, you are the problem, get away from me as far as possible. And so no, these creatives, they're not going to have any self-reflection. They don't have the ability to self-reflect. They're simply going to get more and more and more emotional. They're going to lash out with their emotions because that's the only mechanism available to them to try to soothe their guilty conscience or to reconcile in their minds the fact that the majority of people around them don't accept their progressive narrative, and they will continue to drive as many people away from them as possible because they do it to everyone around them, and certainly to anyone on the other side. So they're going to look at conservative people. They're going to look at anybody who has voted for Donald Trump. They're going to lash out emotionally at them and drive them away. But the problem is, that's the majority of the country. And do you think that's going to present a problem to them at all? No, not at all. It's simply going to justify their mindset that there's a militaristic 1930s German around every corner. That's it. And one other thread to pull on before I move on is the fact that this entire thing is a reflection of feminism. Why? Because the basic female mindset is one of harm avoidance, and certainly of pain avoidance. And this is just a simple biological fact. Men are built for defense, and so we're brought up with the mindset of shake it off. Women are built for reproduction, and they're brought up with a mindset of your feelings are valid. Why? Because they must be protected at all costs. Why? Because they're the method of the reproduction of the entire species. Therefore, they must be protected more than males. And that protection is not just a societal thing, it's a biological thing. They necessarily and justly shrink away from pain much more readily than guys. Now, not to say that they can't endure pain as well as guys. I say that because I know someone's going to put that in the comments. But the point is, they naturally avoid danger. They naturally avoid pain, rightly so, according to their biology. And so the system of feminization of our society, which has come through feminism, is one of harm avoidance, is one of pain avoidance. And so it is the system, too, of progressivism. But here's the thing. Number one, self-reflection requires a basic modicum of pain. It is to say, I did something wrong. That's a painful thought, but I'm going to get rid of that pain through self-correction. And two, since these people don't have self-reflection and they're pain avoiders, I would say hyper pain avoiders because they buy wholeheartedly into this feminist mindset, that gives them even more incentive to lash out as heavily and quickly as possible. Because again, that's the only mechanism they have available to them to try and make themselves feel better. That is to say, to try and lessen their own pain. And this is why you see right now on the internet people who absolutely did not vote for Trump lashing out as quickly as possible. And from all corners. You got politicians like Maxine Waters, big actors like Robert De Niro, comic book writers like Mark Waid. There was even a fellow, I don't know his name, he was on CNN basically saying before the election he was preparing himself documents and a passport so that he could flee the country and try to get his family to follow him afterwards if Donald Trump won the election. And all of a sudden he did win, and people are saying, where are you leaving to? Are you going? And he absolutely denies any responsibility for those words. He's saying, no, I'm not going anywhere. All of these people, all of them are saying, no, I take zero responsibility for anything I've said in the past. Actually, anything I've said or done in the past, or more importantly, am about to do. So with all of that in mind, what is the path forward, the long-term path forward towards better entertainment? Well, in order to answer that question, let's look at the psychological way you can try and get someone out of the mindset of no self-reflection, which, funny enough, is also reflected in the history of Western society. The reason why we are and want to continue to be an efficient society, the reason why our civilization exists in the way that it does in the West is because of reason. And more specifically, because of the mechanism of logic, which is taking the rules of reason and applying them to reason itself. But as I said, getting to reason requires certain steps. And if you look at the ancient history of Western civilization, at the great thinkers, and the person who brought forth the structure and mechanism of logic for us to use in our society was Aristotle. But he didn't just come up with this in a vacuum. Aristotle was the student of Plato. Plato was the student of Socrates. And you can see a progression of that mindset from Socrates through to Aristotle. But the beginning point for Socrates was to ask questions. It is called the Socratic method right now. It is simply to sit and ask questions. Because this is the very beginning point of self-reflection. This is why, in ancient times in Greece, above the oracle at Delphi, which was supposed to help people predict the future, it was written, know thyself. And this is run straight through our civilization. One of the great lines from Hamlet is, to thine own self be true. Why do we have this running through our civilization? It's because this is one of the very first building blocks that lead you to self-reflection. And that self-reflection is then necessary to build reason, which is necessary to follow logic. Because here's the thing, you cannot, absolutely cannot, argue rationally and logically someone out of an opinion that they have gained through emotion. You can't. This is why I did that article for thelotuseaters.com about, a year and a half ago. It was basically stating, stop arguing with these people. These people don't have the ability to interact with your rational argument. They just don't. So stop. There's zero reason to argue with these people. You must deal with them in a different way. And what is that way? Well, you must start with the Socratic method. You must start simply by asking them questions, or at the very least, letting them know that asking questions of themselves is a valid thing to do. And quite honestly, for a normal individual, someone who's not captured by this victimhood narrative from the very beginning of their life, a normal person would have that self-reflection. Why? Because that's what we teach to children. When they scream and wail and try to get their way, what are you supposed to say to that child? You're supposed to say, okay, calm down, use your words. Which means what? It means, yes, these people are 2-year-olds. They don't even have the basic concept of emotional control and settling themselves down so that they can use their words properly. They're 2-year-olds, emotionally, and to some extent cognitively. They are children. And if you follow politics on YouTube, you can see that even before the election, there were a handful of people which were starting to come to the realization of, I need to self-reflect. Something's not right here. If you look at, Anna Kasparian from the Young Turks, for the last year and a half or more, she's been going through a slow process of red pilling. Why? Because she got assaulted and everyone was jumping down her throat for complaining about the assault because she's on the progressive left. That's what her entire show that she's on is based around. But she came to some self-reflection from that moment. So much so that she's actually quoting a YouTuber now who I regularly watch, who is the Black Conservative Perspective. I would not have in a million years thought that that was even possible 2 years ago. And I mention that in part because when the midterms happened last time, I myself went through a process of self-reflection. I believed there was a red wave coming, and when it didn't turn out to be so, I said, okay, some of these people that I'm listening to just don't know what they're talking about. Some of them, I said, okay, I'm not going to listen to them anymore. I might stay subscribed in order to read what is basically their headlines. Some of them I'm going to listen to with a great deal of salt. And some of them, the ones who got it right, I'm going to listen to a little more. And one of those people who didn't get it right, but went through his own process of self-reflection was the Black Conservative Perspective. That's why I watch him on a more regular basis now. And why do I bring all that up? Because we see something going on right now, again, if you're on the politosphere of YouTube, within your quote-unquote progressive, heavy left-wing YouTube channels. The very bigger ones anyway. They have done videos talking about how since the election, they have lost a major number of subscribers. Now, I think that's a relative term. We're talking about channels that have 1 to 3 million subscribers, and they're talking about how since the election, within a week, they've lost tens of thousands of subscribers, and on top of that, memberships. So they're saying it's not just the YouTube algorithm, because if it was, we would just be losing subscribers, not memberships as well. And their message is to people, please, please don't leave. Now is not the time to panic. Because they themselves, the quote-unquote progressive YouTubers, are deathly afraid of a death spiral from the algorithm. The algorithm basically saying, okay, you're hemorrhaging subscribers and members, therefore we're not going to recommend this to people. Therefore, the less you get recommended, the more people who are going to drop off, and your entire channel is just going to sink into the toilet. Now, first off, I don't think that's actually going to happen. I think the algorithm is the reason why they have 1 to 3 million subscribers to begin with. It's bent towards them. Therefore, they have that cushion, so we can't depend on that. But the other thing is that why are these people leaving? Leaving, by the way, in a way that the YouTubers can't understand because they have no self-reflection, but they're leaving because of self-reflection. They're leaving because they've had a cold bucket of water splashed in their face when they believed wholeheartedly from these channels over the last couple of months that Kamala Harris was going to not only win, but win in a landslide. And when she lost in a landslide, well, yeah, that splash of cold water in the face is enough for some self-reflection. Enough at the very least for them to say, yeah, I'm done listening to you. Now I realize that tens of thousands of people out of 2 to 3 million is only about 1%. But if this continues to happen, if that percentage continues to increase, there's our path forward. And, oh, by the way, we do see this in larger entertainment as well, but I wouldn't count on that as an engine to drive good entertainment forward either. The reason why we don't see any self-reflection on the part of politicians who are on the losing side is because their form of politics has no accountability. Now, you might say that this election shows there is accountability, but no. Their entire quote-unquote progressive far-left mindset is we will win the next election, and then the next election after that, and then the next election after that. In their minds, there might be some setbacks, like what we see right now, but that's just a temporary setback. Why? Because they're progressives. They believe that history is on a progressive trajectory, and there is no way that you can stop it. You might be able to slow it down for a little bit, but there's simply no way to stop it. That's the whole point of progressivism. Therefore, they don't have any reason to be self-reflective. They absolutely do not. And they skip out on any responsibility by projecting all of their problems, again, into the future. Oh, we don't have to deal with that now. We'll deal with that in the future when we have a better way of dealing with things because, again, their assumption is we will progress into a point where everybody accepts our ideology more and more. So we'll have a better situation to deal with that problem in the future. So the politicians are absolutely not going to self-reflect. But we do see the beginning of some self-reflection within the corporate worlds of entertainment. Supposedly, and I can only say that, supposedly, Robert De Niro, after going through his Trump derangement rants, has been let go from some of the projects that he's been working on. If we look at the comic world, Mark Waid has been ranting in an unhinged way, and supposedly DC Comics, who he's supposed to be helping rebuild have said to him, be quiet. And why? Well, because these people who run the companies have to be responsible. They can literally be sued by the shareholders of their company, and they're in a bit of a sticky spot right now because there's literally been a referendum during this election on whether or not the people of America want this quote-unquote woke progressive message within anything that they touch. And they've been shown that no, they don't. And if they continue to openly, and I will say it that way, openly push this progressive agenda when they know that the majority of people don't want it, that will be contrary to the very specific terms of their job, which is to make as much money for the company as possible. So therefore, they can give the shareholders as much money as possible, and they can literally be sued. The shareholders can take them to court and say they were grossly negligent in executing their duties, and they can be taken to the cleaners. Therefore, there is some responsibility there. But again, I wouldn't hang my hat on any of that because the people who run these companies have a vast amount of experience in hiding the fact that they wish to drive this quote-unquote progressive agenda into everything that they do. So there may be a glimmer of hope there, but I'm not going to count any chickens there. So that leaves us, once again, with this percentage of the population who have had this splash of cold water in their face with what has happened. They were told one thing absolutely was true, and they have been shown that absolutely that thing now is not true. It is leading them to self-reflection. Again, it's a small percentage of people, but number one, that small percentage of people can grow, and number two, as they do grow, they're being embraced by the other side, the conservative side, at the very least telling them, yeah, it's okay if you ask questions. It's okay if you self-correct. And that's the path forward, because if we can widen that gap, if we can change that 1% to 5%, or maybe even 10%, then yes, there is going to be a death spiral for this progressive agenda within our society and the vanguard of this agenda, which is entertainment. And I want to end on the following note. As I said at the beginning, this is a crucial point within this culture war, and we must efficiently, logically, and rationally open that gap. Push that 1% to 5%, maybe 10%. Push it in the simple way of acknowledging to these people who are throwing up their hands that, yes, it's okay if you ask questions. But the other side is doing everything they can to ensure that people do not ask that question of themselves. Richard over at Comics Matter is covering some of the hot takes from the people in the comic industry, and he brought up an interesting point. He's saying, if you're looking at all these statements that these people make, people like Mark Waid, G. Willow Wilson, Heather Ontos, in his estimation, they're basically telling the quote-unquote progressive people, in words of don't give up hope, to actually give up hope. He thinks it is their plan to push someone to the ultimate desperation of ending themselves because of hopelessness, so that they can point to that and say, look, see what the other side has pushed us to? Again, victim narrative. And I will say, I don't think he's completely incorrect there, because these comic professionals are saying, we know that it's absolutely hopeless right now, but don't give up hope. But I think a heavy strain of what is being said in the background of such statements is, don't self-reflect. Absolutely do not self-reflect. Do not give up by self-reflecting and seeing that there is something wrong with this progressive ideology. Because in their minds, someone who actually does reflect on their own biases, on their own thoughts, on their own feelings, is going to see, or at the very least start to see, the absurdity of the quote-unquote progressive victim narrative. And if they do that, since everything in this narrative is based upon power, if people start to do that, they're as good as dead. To their political ideology, they're as good as dead. Even worse, they're joining the other side by self-reflecting. And that's why I think, in part, Richard is correct. These people would not mind at all if someone was to end themselves through hopelessness that emanates from their statements, because their fighting back is so extreme that they would rather see people on their own side dead than to have them embrace the building blocks of self-reflection. So, if I've given you anything new to think about, hit like, hit the shield in the lower right-hand corner of your screen to subscribe, and leave me a comment. Tell me what you think about all this. And don't forget, there are 2 links in the description for my 3 graphic novels that concentrate on a merit-based system of storytelling and creation of the art, where we focus on ideas like heroism and true honor. So if any of that looks or sounds appealing to you at all, click on one of those links in the description and go on over and see if one of my graphic novels is for you. All right, I'll leave it there. I'll see you later.